Well, great. I think we'll go ahead and get started. I see a few more people coming in. That's great. I'll try and admit everybody as we go. Today, we're talking about tree benefits. So if you were able to join last week, that's great. We'll be talking about some new citizen science ideas today than we discussed last week. And if you weren't able to join then, that's fine. We're gonna do a very brief intro so you can see where we're coming from with EcoSpark for some of these ideas. All right, can I have one person say if they could hear me using the chat feature? Give me a thumbs up. I appreciate that. Awesome, thank you. Okay, it's no fun to talk for a while without anybody hearing you. Great, so feel free to use that chat as we go. We're gonna have some interaction, a little bit of polls to get some of your input and feedback, and that'll be really helpful, I think, as we go. Without further ado, here's our screen. Okay. So I'm Citizen Science Coordinator at EcoSpark, and it's really my pleasure to be working with community members all across the Greater Toronto area to learn more about our environment. I have a few groups this week. I've had some students out in the fields. That was really fun that we could do some in-person to do what we do best, which I think is empowering people to take an active role in protecting and sustaining their local environment. And we do that by giving people the tools for education, monitoring, and influencing positive change. So the Discover, Act, Change is a journey that I hope all of you have begun and that we can continue to express as we move through the seasons here. I should have updated my slides with more colorful fall foliage, but I'll let you guys do that. Right, so just a really brief overview. EcoSpark has a number of different programs. So we do talk about trees, but we're also involved in water quality. That's our Changing Currents program. School Watch is the groups that I mentioned, mostly on school grounds, actually looking at their properties and figuring out, is this good habitat for pollinators? How can the students make it better? We have some hands-on plantings that they can do. Similarly with park groups, I know many of you are coming from the Community Stewardship Program with City of Toronto or are interested in learning more about that. So it looks like we have Monica with us today, and I think at the end we'll be able to answer any questions they might have about the Community Stewardship Program. And we've worked with them in the past as well. Volunteers have helped, especially with the invasive species campaigns, working on Phragmites in parks across Toronto. In addition, we have a Greenbelt program that I'd really like to highlight here because the Greenbelt, as we know, surrounds Toronto and gives us all of our fresh air and water that is largely thanks to the trees. And you can see this group here in the picture on your lower left are helping to assess tree habitat through the Greenbelt program. Students are learning about how they can in turn support the Greenbelt, so the Greenbelt supports us. What can we do to promote policies that are encouraging Greenbelt protection? And they had a terrific campaign this summer. So this is youth of all ages up to through university, that is, high school and university. And the volunteers, even remotely, were able to organize a fantastic campaign to let people know about some of the proposed restrictions to Greenbelt protection. And I think they mobilized their response in 3 weeks, which is incredible. And then Nature Academy, part of what we do through citizen science training is work with teachers and community volunteers to help them reach others. So everything that we promote, all the citizen science projects, are free online. People can access iNaturalist, for example, we'll talk about. And we're just providing some of the tools and the how-to get more people involved. So I hope you'll come away from this hour today with some concrete ideas for how you can get going even today in your backyard to learn more about tree benefits, but then connect others as well. So our programs, as I mentioned, take place in schools, parks, and communities. And something in common with all the spaces is that we have trees. Even street trees are wonderful. They're in high demand. There's greater services that they provide just because of their location in an urban environment. So we're going to be talking about the trees closest to home, as well as some of the larger ecosystem services that they can provide in non-urban forests. I'm going to try and launch a poll here just to find out a little bit about the audience. Let me make sure we've got that going. Okay, so you should have popping up for you the first question. So this is tree knowledge, and it's a multiple choice, so you can select all that apply. How would you characterize your own knowledge of trees? So you can read carefully each option, and thank you for responding. It looks like people are already getting that poll. Then we'll be sharing this with a group so you can learn more about the other people watching today. And remember, you can tick off more than one. So if you've got multiple tree knowledge locations, then you can let us know here. Excellent. So we do have some, it looks like people working with trees professionally, and that's wonderful. I hope you'll pipe in, especially we'll have time for questions at the end. And if people have specific questions that I can't answer, then we can crowdsource some of that as well. All right, and we'll give that about 30 more seconds. I'm glad that nobody has not thought about trees before. I assume there's sort of a self-selection when you sign up for a tree webinar, but you never know. And I would like you to think about how you can present to other people about tree benefits after we talk today. So what's most compelling to you? We'll have one more question about that later. All right, looks like we've got our responses in. I'll see if I can share that with everybody. All right, unsurprisingly, most people went with the moderate choice, which is they have a moderate amount of tree knowledge. That's great. I think you probably know more than you realize. Anybody who has thought about trees a bit realizes that they have sort of an intuitive understanding of the benefits of trees. So we'll just look at a little bit of how we can quantify some of the benefits that we suspect we're getting from the trees in our communities. So you should be able to see those results. And there we go. So what we've been talking about in the webinar last week and today is citizen science. This is really my passion. I came about as a citizen scientist into this field. So I was just interested in nature and what I could learn. And I went to school to learn a little bit more about how everyday nature observations can be important from a scientific standpoint. But just a quick definition, we're really talking about citizens of the world here. So I know the name can be problematic, but it's a very inclusive practice, actually. We're studying nearby nature together. It's a very old tradition. You can think of, 100 years ago, sort of casual scientists taking very careful measurements of, for example, cherry blossoms and what time they bloomed every year, what date they bloomed on. That led to long-term data sets that are hugely helpful from a professional scientific standpoint. So there's an aspect of citizen science too that I'll challenge you to take a look at, and that's the homegrown inquiry part. So not just following along with other citizen science projects, but asking your own questions and thinking about developing citizen science to make the most of what your own questions are. So if you have just a casual question when you're walking down the street, what tree is this maybe, or how is it benefiting my neighborhood? Even by asking that and then sharing the news with other people that there are tools out there to make some of these assessments, you can start to develop the answers that are most important to you. So by asking the right questions, you can understand more about the local environment. And environmental monitoring is something fun and helpful that can be done even from home during times of COVID, it's really important, I think, to stay connected in meaningful ways, even scientifically. So we don't have the same field capacity. For example, like EcoSpark is not able to run as many assessments with groups this fall as we would like, but by having individuals help out and volunteer from home, we can come up with similar data sets. So we're gonna do one more little participation piece here. So you'll need the chat feature if you can open that up if you haven't already. And in the chat, I'd like you to think about a particular tree. So you don't need to know what species it is, but maybe you do. And this tree should be something that you have a strong connection with or a strong memory. It could be anything at all. And then type in the chat and share with us just a phrase to represent that. What is it about that tree that made it memorable or important to you? All right, I'm going to participate. I'm typing in. All right, thanks everyone. And we have fall color. Yes, absolutely. This time of year, it's pretty astounding. I think we have a really good year for it. A desert tree that attracted incredible number of migratory birds, thinking about wildlife. Uplifting, so we're looking even at human health, and we'll talk about that a little bit later today. Fragrant, exotic blooms on a catalpa. Oh my gosh, I love a catalpa. Catalpa trees in our neighborhood are just standing out to me this year for some reason. Those big heart-shaped leaves. And yeah, I didn't think about the flowers. So we're thinking about the different times of year and what the tree is doing in the spring versus in the fall, and those different benefits as well. Childhood memories, climbing trees, being connected with nature. I think that's a common thread. A lot of people who are interested in nature as adults had some childhood foundation, even if it was in a very urban place. That might have been a tree in the backyard or off of their balcony that they could see and connect with. Mother Willow used to be at Variety Village when I was a child. Awesome. So there's all kinds of community connections and wildlife support from trees. So we're going to think a little bit more about how that tree connects to the other trees in our urban forest. Thank you for participating. You may have come across this incredible resource before, but they are in print at the library and are available online as well, the Toronto Biodiversity series. And the Trees of Toronto is a really standout version of this, I think. It's a whole book. It's hugely informative, but also very compelling, I think, well-researched. So if you want to kind of find a quick snapshot of trees in Toronto, it's almost the best field guide to start with, I think. And then I recommend, if you want to learn more about trees as a whole, the Sibley guides are really fantastic. And also the Lone Pine, so what they're called, Lone Pine tree guides. So those are the two that we use most with our programs. And I think, you know, there's something to be said for a paper field guide to get us unplugged as we're going out. And then we'll talk about some of the online resources and ID apps that can be really helpful too if you're looking to learn more about specific trees. So one of the most important benefits, and one that we think about a lot at EcoSpark, is clean water. In Toronto, we see the benefits of trees in a very tangible way as our water flows through increasingly urban areas until it comes to Lake Ontario. And of course, all of our drinking water is supported by the surrounding forest. So how does this work? You can try this at home. If you take a bucket and it's got holes in the bottom of it, and you find some sort of decomposing leaves, like if you're walking through a forest, you could pick up some of that leaf mulch, or even just off of the street, that's fine. You fill up your bucket, start maybe with stones, and then put in a layer of very thick leaves, so like 5 to 6 inches. And then if you take some muddy water and pour it through that bucket, catch some of it that comes through after it's gone through the leaves and see if there's a difference in color. So it's literally just filtering out all of the contaminants, and that's how we're cleaning the water with vegetation. It's like a very mechanical process. It's very intuitive. I think it makes sense to people that you can kind of clean things by filtering. So with the trees and the root system taking up water on a landscape scale, and then cycling it back through, that is what cleans the water that we drink. If you have any questions, by the way, feel free to use the chat and I'll try and check periodically there in case we have anybody coming up with questions as we go, and then at the end we'll have a little bit of a discussion. Hi, if you're just joining us, my name's Dana and we're talking about trees with EcoSpark and some citizen science techniques to look at them. So for water quality, we have some ways to assess exactly how clean the waterways are. In EcoSpark's program Changing Currents, students are actually collecting this data. And I'm going to share a tool with you so you can look at the waterways nearest your house, and we'll take a look at how forest contributes to the health of our waterways. So just a background on how this program works. The students or community volunteers collect data, and they're using a kick and sweep method in the streams to collect a sample of benthic macroinvertebrates, which are small stream-dwelling insects and other critters. They rinse out the sample. I'm hiding my own screen, are doing some chemical analysis and identification of the benthic macroinvertebrates. And part of the chemical analysis that they do is temperature. So think how tree shade would affect the temperature of your local creeks and waterways, right? If it's overhanging and we have the hot sun beating down all summer, then that makes a huge difference in the temperature of water. Now, why is that important? We've learned that the hotter the water is, then the poorer quality it is for environmental benefits. Okay, so shade makes the water cooler. The cool water can carry more oxygen. We're preventing the growth of harmful algae by reducing the temperature. And of course, with climate change, there's like another layer on that temperature factor, right? So the shade of the trees is helping us have clean water, even from this, from the temperature standpoint. In Changing Currents, all of these factors are brought together, and we're going to look at the data analysis tool that stems from that. Finally, one of the actions that we encourage all of the Changing Currents participants to take is to plant trees. So we talk about how the vegetation can clean the water through that filtration, and then the other benefits of trees on our clean water. And then we encourage and provide some tools for people to get involved in reforesting and creating vegetation in their riverside habitat. All right, welcome. So there's just a delay in my slides there. One of the benefits, of course, in participating in citizen science is that people are getting outside. Okay, so a lot of these citizen science projects, the reason that we're not just doing them in university labs is that we have a lot more hands on the ground by having participation, and we can learn more about our local waterways and the habitat that we are inhabiting. So I really love that hands-on aspect of all of the citizen science projects. There should be a connection right here. There we are. So if you'll bear with me, I'm just going to show you this water quality dashboard, and we're going to try and explore it together. Here we are. Okay. um, if I can't share this feature, then we'll just talk through it. I think we can do it. Okay, it looks like we're not going to be able to share the actual model. Okay, that's all right. I will explain how this one works and we can go through it that way. Apologies about that. All right, and we come back to the PowerPoint. Here we are. Okay, sorry about that. So I will give you the link if you're interested in exploring this on your own. It's at ecospark.ca, and you'll see there's a tab that says Citizen Science Maps. So you can explore the dashboard as you go. But what we're showing you here, if you see in the data analysis picture in the lower portion of your screen, there's an interactive map that combines all of the water quality data that we've collected over the years with many groups looking throughout the GTA. And you can turn on different layers of the map to show how vegetation around the streams has actually affected the water quality. So in this, again, we're looking in this data analysis tab at the bottom. On the left, you can see that there's green, yellow, and red, and the green is unimpaired sites, and then potentially impaired and impaired. So you can take a moment after the webinar at ecospark.ca, type in your own address, and then see what the nearest creek has to offer in terms of our portrait of that data analysis, and then turn on the layer that has vegetation and see if there is vegetation near you. And I'll just give you a heads up that it does show that as we're getting towards Lake Ontario with all of our major waterways, we're finding more impaired streams. So of course, this is for a variety of factors. We also have greater pollution sources as we go through the urban environment, but we do see a reduction in vegetation, and that has a huge impact on our waterways. I'm sorry about the technical difficulty there. We'll move right along. So another benefit of our urban forest is flood protection. So this gets talked about quite a lot, but I think people maybe don't visualize exactly what it is about trees that is helping us mitigate floods. So you can try this at home. If you have just a simple board, like I use the, you know where you put your dishes in the dish rack to dry off, the board that's under that, something that is waterproof that you can hold on an angle, and then put a few sponges along half of that. So just set some sponges on that board. And then take a measuring cup and pour water along the board, and pour the water on the part where there's no sponges. And then pour the water above the sponges and let it trickle down through the sponges. Now, as the water comes out, you can even have a tray under to catch the water that comes out. How quickly is the water filling up the basin after it comes down the board? So you have a board like this. You're pouring the water down something that represents like a paved surface with no sponges. And then you can set some sponges, if you see my little video in the corner. And you pour the water through, then the water that goes down the sponge area trickles out very slowly. Okay, so all of the water will eventually make it down that plane. And that happens when it rains as well, right? All of the water eventually makes it down to, in our case, Lake Ontario. But it's coming down more slowly when we have vegetated areas. So this is what we mean by trees mitigating floods, because basically a major storm event will have a ton of water dumped on the landscape all at once, and the trees just help to slow it down and absorb some of that. Our wetlands as well are acting like sponges to help out. And of course, with climate change, we're noticing not only changes in temperature, but changes in our precipitation patterns. So the storm events are more intense. We're getting more water all at once, and that's making it even more important that we have the trees to kind of mitigate that, so we don't end up with the flooding that causes major issues. And a really fun and easy citizen science project that can help you learn about how the water is being captured by trees is just to install a simple rain gauge. So you can make your own. I'll be sharing all of the links from our webinar afterwards, and you'll have a link there to make it sort of a simplified one with a soda bottle. But you can also use a scientific rain gauge, which is a really simple and pretty affordable tool, and participate in a project where you're recording simply how much rain fell at your location in a 24-hour period. So you can see a portion of the rain gauge on your screen there, and you just read the exact measurement. So it tells you how many millimeters fell right at your location. The benefit of everybody helping out with a project like this is that we have more fine-tuned data. So there might be only one weather station in a town, or a few across an urban area, but it's hard to assess the nuance, which makes better predictions for weather events going forward. And of course, we can learn more about our community precipitation by exploring some of the localized patterns. So there's really great maps that come out of this, and it's a fun project. There's really excellent training videos. It's all animated, as you can see here. And if you have any questions about that, you can contact EcoSpark, who are using rain gauges on school properties and in our own backyards as we go. And I will mention, if there are any educators in the group, we're offering rain gauges for teachers to get set up. So you can contact me, and we'll learn more about how rain gauges are tied to climate change. Before we leave rain gauges, I'll also say, if you're feeling a little bit mathematically inclined today, I'm going to challenge you to figure out how much permeable surface you have at your property, so wherever you find yourself. And that permeable surface might be paved, right, sidewalks, or it could be a roof, and how much impermeable surface you have. So anything that's covered in a tree canopy, it doesn't even have to be the trunk, anything that could, if a raindrop falls, land on vegetation, and compare those two amounts. So if you look at a Google Map image of your property, for example, and you can just kind of trace around what is green and what is not green, then you can multiply. If you have a rain gauge, you can multiply and see what the runoff is, it's called. So how much water is immediately leaving your property off of the paved surfaces versus being absorbed down into the root system of the tree and leading to filtration and some of those better benefits that we have. So that's kind of a homework project that you can try if you're interested in getting involved. One of the things that I think a lot of people mentioned when they were thinking about their personal connections with trees is the wildlife habitat. So Toronto, from that biodiversity series, you can explore a little bit the incredible biodiversity that we have, even downtown. This image is of a blinded sphinx moth, and it was submitted to EcoSpark's iNaturalist page. So iNaturalist is a citizen science project where people can share nature photos and then discuss them. And somebody saw this in Toronto this summer. It's an amazing species. I was just learning a little bit more about it, and it uses deciduous trees as a caterpillar, and then the adults actually don't feed at all. As soon as they hatch, they seek a mate and reproduce, and that's that. So you can see the beautiful adult here on, of course, another benefit of trees, which is wood, and wood is still an incredibly valuable building project, so not to be underrated. But the blinded sphinx moth presumably used a living tree. The willow family, I think, is popular for them, or 9-bark shrubs, and was able to make its entire life cycle here in Toronto, which is incredible. We can explore the wildlife that's inhabiting our local urban forest with this tool called iNaturalist. And the whole idea, of course, is just to share nature observations so that we can learn more about how the populations have been shifting over time. And you can find some rare species, you can decide what's common, you can learn if there are invasive species, all without actually knowing the names of what it is that you're seeing. Because if you download the app for iNaturalist and then point your device at whatever it is that you want to observe, take a photo, then it will start to suggest the names and give you some ideas about what it is that you're observing. So if you're already an iNaturalist participant, and I suspect that many of you are, we're encouraging volunteers to join the EcoSpark Participant Observations Project. So you would just select projects, join, you can type in EcoSpark to find us. And that lets us sort of see a snapshot of our local wildlife. And we can share this, all of the results that are shared onto the EcoSpark page are on the maps that our students can see when we run projects in schools. So community members are really strengthening the program for all of the other participants by participating in that. There's also a Seek app. We discussed this a little bit last week if you were around. Seek does not necessarily connect to iNaturalist, so you have a choice. If you download the Seek app, you can just take photos for your own pleasure and learn more about the wildlife and the species that you're seeing. You can also say, I would like to connect this for citizen science and contribute my photos to the online database. I recommend that you do that if you can, because it's hugely helpful to have so many eyes on the ground helping to find the local wildlife in our communities. But you really have the choice there. And it's really simple to get involved. If you haven't done it before, you just let iNaturalist or Seek know what you saw, when you saw it, and then submit some evidence. So it could be a photo, or if you're looking at wildlife, it might be a bird call. And it will automatically show you a location. However, you can set the location to be very specific, or you can make it more general, like this tree was observed in my neighborhood today. And then for iNaturalist, just a note that you will need to make a free account by submitting your email. And we have journal entries and all kinds of information, so you can have your settings however you like to get more notifications or fewer from iNaturalist. For Seek, you don't need any sort of account. And that's a really fun project to get started with. The other thing that Seek has, which is fun for families, I think, is these virtual badges. So if you see on the lower right, if you observe, for example, a bird, then you get a bird badge, and you can find all about different taxonomic groups that way. But there are lots of citizen science projects out there. So I think in some cases it can even be overwhelming. What I suggest is sort of an entryway to citizen science is birding, because there are really tremendous interpretation resources because there are so many birders that have been interested in sharing these with the community. So eBird or Birds Canada are a really great starting point for specifically looking at birds in our urban canopy. We printed out these photo cards, so you can see a picture of a photo card where you can type in your address to Birds Canada, and then it'll show you the 30 most common bird species that you're likely to see. So if you're just getting started and you feel like a bird guide is a little bit overwhelming, then you can kind of picture match to learn some of the most common species around you or get other people involved in birding. And then if you want to go a bit further, Merlin has a great bird ID app that lets you kind of select from size and shape and some other things that you can readily identify when you're out looking for the wildlife. And even from the window, you don't have to go out far into the forest to find birds using the trees in our environment. And All About Birds is a really great intro. So all of these can be found online, and we'll share the links again afterwards if you're interested in learning more about local wildlife. So we know that trees are supporting, we've talked about flood control and clean water. We've talked about wildlife benefits, but they're also mitigating climate change. So I think for me, this is the most compelling reason to protect trees and help support healthy forests. You can think about it at a very local level. If you have a tree near your home, how shady is it in the summertime? Is it providing you relief even inside your home so that you can turn down the AC a little bit and have energy savings from that shade? This is actually proven, right? We have tremendous amount of energy reduction just from having shade trees. So that's why, for example, the municipality is promoting Tree for Me programs, encouraging people to plant in their front and backyards if they're able to, and why so many of our parks are having trees added all of the time. Another general benefit of trees is, of course, carbon sequestration. So as the tree breathes in, it's taking in and holding onto that carbon for a while, and then hopefully slowly releasing it back into the air instead of a big burst. Forest fires are a huge explosion of carbon into the air, right? As those trees are burning, that's actually a nasty contributor to climate change. So it's really important that when we think about forests, we think about them holistically, and how can you best manage a forest system so that it's going to be a healthy long-term contributor to benefits. So especially when we're thinking about out west, the forest fire management, prescribed burns, taking steps to ensure that the forest is making its entire life cycle as it had evolved. That's going to be the best way to on a landscape level, keep our forests contributing in a positive way. And then we talked a little bit about human health, but I think climate change can be a really kind of stressful topic. I work with kids a lot, and you can see them already just kind of shut down if you bring up climate change and you're not talking about the positives and what we can do to help. But we've seen there's evidence that people just looking at a natural scene outside of a hospital window heal faster than people who are looking at blank walls or don't have a vision of nature. So this is entirely a human health benefit to be surrounded by trees. And I think when we're talking about access and equitable access in our communities, thinking about how we can connect with green spaces is really hugely important. So something that we can do is just to support people getting out into nature, enabling more communities to understand and protect the local parks that are our closest nature. That's really important. I'm just going to take one moment to check the chat here. And if anybody has a question, feel free and share that. Okay. All right, thanks for bearing with me here. Monica, I'm going to ask my technical glitch has left me without the chat feature today. So if you don't mind asking any of the questions verbally that people have typed into the chat, I would appreciate that.
No problem. I don't see any questions so far.
Thanks, Monica. Okay. So our native plants are supporting biodiversity, and we've talked about this in terms of supporting our native pollinators, for example. But if you're thinking about putting in a tree, for example, why would you choose one over the other? And we have a lot of beautiful native tree varieties that you could think about putting in. And luckily, there's tons of resources on this. So organizations like LEAF, LEAF, have supported, you know, you can get a brochure that says all of the tree species that are pretty commonly available that are also native to put into your space.
Hi, Dana. We do have a question now. Sorry.
Thanks,
Uh,
Monica.
Terry's asking, are there any tree species in the GTA that could be considered to be invasive?
Thanks, awesome. Yeah, it's a good question. I think the Norway maple is one that you hear a lot about because it's also, I don't know if it's naturalized or just become relatively common in urban spaces, but people do suggest that you choose the native maples over that one. And the reason that we're thinking about natives is that it evolved with our indigenous wildlife. So even trees can rely on pollinators. Some of them are wind pollinated, but others, like your cherry varieties, apples, all of the fruiting trees, they have blossoms, right? And so the native pollinators rely on those for a food source, and it's great to have support for them. They're also well adapted. The trees that you're planting that are native are well adapted to the local climate and soil conditions, so they'll tend to thrive and do a little better. For example, a lot of people put in different kinds of spruce, and the ones from Colorado are like native to North America, but they're not as locally adapted. So the ones that are even more native, that are like Ontario natives, are going to be very fine-tuned, adapted to our local climate and soil conditions. And please share in the chat if you have other examples of invasive trees, was the question, that are found in Toronto and might be a problem in Toronto. Please share in the chat. That would be great. In addition, diversity is key, right? So if you can think about increasing the levels of diversity across the urban forest, then if you have some sort of new blight that moves in, it's not going to wipe out everything all at once, right? So we're not just planting elms, we're not just planting chestnuts, we're planting a mix, and then the urban forest as a whole is more resilient over time. And we're thinking long-term for trees, right? You want to think about having space and having support for that tree for 80 years, in which case the tree would be a healthy teenager, all right? So, and for mature forests, you hear about old growth forests, right? An oak tree that's 100 years old might have reached its peak height, but it's still going to grow and become wider for 500 years. So an actual old tree might be 500 years or more. And we're really trying to think on those levels when you're talking about trees. Another benefit of trees that we know is that it cleans the air. So you might remember from your high school science that the air exchange from oxygen and carbon dioxide is a trade-off. So if a human is able to breathe out carbon dioxide, then the tree can take that in and it uses oxygen as well. The actual ratio for that is that one tree can support 20 humans. So I think about this when I'm walking down the sidewalk sometimes, and you can kind of count how many people pass before you pass another street tree. And you can think about what the ratio should be for just cleaning the air in a very basic air exchange way. We also have the same filtration process happening with the air. So the vegetation is taking impurities out of the air, removing some of those pollution sources just by having air exchange through its substance. And one of the projects that we're asking for volunteers with is to look a little bit more closely at these tree benefits. So we've developed a survey 123 tree survey. That's just a quick online health assessment. In the emailed link, you'll have that link. So you click on it, you go to the website, and they'll ask you a few questions about trees just near your home. It could be near your place of work, near your school, any trees that you like. And it's a tool that we're developing to try and have participants take a closer look at quantifying the tree benefits that are nearby. And the more participants that we have, the better we can develop this tool to share results throughout the community. So there are a number of different tools available and sort of crowdsourced options for learning more about trees. I recently found out that Toronto District School Board has inventoried all of the trees on all of their properties, which is kind of incredible. iTree, ITREE is another one that's sort of an open source data about trees in the community. But what we're really looking at is a snapshot of the trees and their health to learn about some of the benefits that can be shared. So I ask you to participate in that. If you have any feedback, we'll have a feedback survey, and you can also email me at dana@ecospark.ca as we develop this tool and make it much more user-friendly. It's a new project, so that's where we're really looking for community volunteers to help out. And then, as I mentioned, citizen science has opportunities for people to get involved in existing projects, right, like iNaturalist or eBird that we talked about. But there's also this opportunity to kind of come in at the ground level and think about where citizen science should be going and what direction it can be helpful in. So EcoSpark is launching an initiative to look at air quality with citizens volunteers, maybe making some sort of small air quality monitors, thinking about projects that already exist to look at the health of our local communities from a sort of the bubble around each person and what they're breathing kind of standpoint. And this is the very early stages of citizen science project design. So we're seeking community input on that. And if you're interested in volunteering, you can email me at dana@ecospark.ca. We'll probably have a brainstorming session in the winter at some point where we can talk about some of the citizen science opportunities that we could work on with the CSP or with other community groups and anybody who wants to get involved in learning more about air quality. So I'm going to try one more poll here. And I'm actually going to use the results of this poll to look at tree benefits and our projects that we're launching to help inform people who might not be as familiar with trees as you all are. So we're wondering, in talking about trees with others in my community, I feel this benefit is most compelling. So we're wondering which tree benefit you think people are most motivated by. And if that is across the board in your community, that's great. If not, and you feel like there's multiple answers here, just choose the best one. What do you think people in your community find most compelling? We'll give about 30 seconds more. All right, thanks. There's a good mix coming in. It looks like most people have participated. That's wonderful. I'm going to do 5 more seconds. Excellent. All right, let's share those results. Okay, so we had about a third of respondents thought that aesthetic benefits would be most compelling to others in the community. Right, they look nice, they make shade. When people are talking about trees, they're usually talking about how they look, and that's a great benefit. Interestingly, a third of people responded that they thought clean air would be very compelling. So I think the reason that air is so compelling a topic is that everybody can relate to it, right? If you hold your breath, you instantly know what it's like to be without clean air. And I think that could be an interesting campaign if we're looking at air quality monitors. And then wildlife habitat. And yeah, this is really a personable side of trees, right? It's home for such diverse wildlife. The moth, as we saw, but then also a huge range of other insects, mammals, bird populations. And I think as soon as you start dipping into iNaturalist and observing some of the wildlife around your home, then you'll realize that almost all of them have a connection to the urban forest, and that's why they're here. So thanks for participating.
Dana, we have another question from Andrew.
Thanks.
Oh, he said, actually not a question. He read the question wrong. People in his community wouldn't care about wildlife habitat, apparently.
Okay. All right. So there you go. Andrew's got a job in the community to help convince others to care more about the habitat and maybe make a connection to human health for them. All right. So just to wrap up today, I think we'll have a few minutes for questions at the end. But I think the takeaway is that you can collect and submit observations on your own, and it becomes hugely helpful. As soon as you've submitted a simple photo to iNaturalist, then you've entered a conversation. So other naturalists in the community, other people who want to learn more about the wildlife and the vegetation that's right around our homes can understand how these connections are being made. If you submit up to, let's say, 5 observations for citizen science in the next week, and I've challenged some of you to do this last week. I'm wondering if anybody was able to submit. If you submit 5 observations or 5 more observations for citizen science, then I think you're well on your road to citizen science participation. So here you can see a snapshot of somebody's recent observations for iNaturalist on the EcoSpark page. The map will show you all of the observations that have been made in the area, and you can zoom in and find out what was in your neighborhood. I had my neighbor downstairs, I convinced him to take a look at Seek and iNaturalist, and he said, yeah, I looked in there, and it looked like almost all of the local ones were from you. So you might find that you're the star of your neighborhood just by submitting 5 observations to iNaturalist. And maybe you'll learn something new from the neighbors that have already submitted. And then I'm also going to ask that you keep in touch with EcoSpark. We have a lot of programs and exciting upcoming events that we're promoting. We're going to be doing sort of a homeschooling opportunity to get involved in citizen science, which starts online, but it gives people tools to get outside and have some interaction with the natural environment. So that's scheduled for October 27th, and we'll be promoting it at ecospark.ca. You can sign up for our newsletter to learn more about adult opportunities to volunteer, that Greenbelt program that I mentioned for youth. So we're hoping that everybody can stay involved and then give us some excellent new ideas and feedback on our programs to strengthen the community through nature interaction. I also, Monica, feel free to pitch in here. Monica's from the Community Stewardship Program. But the goal of the Community Stewardship Program is to connect the community to Toronto's ravines and parks through hands-on stewardship. And so I think this is a really fantastic way to get involved. If you're interested in learning more for this year or for next year, the contact information with Community Stewardship Program or with other forestry volunteer programs is greentoronto@toronto.ca. And you can also visit toronto.ca/trees to learn more and hopefully get involved with some hands-on volunteering. Monica, do you want to add anything there?
No, I think you covered it. Just to say, this year was unfortunately a very short season because of the pandemic. We had to take some time to modify everything, and we don't know what next year is going to look like yet, but we're hoping we'll at least get an earlier start. So yeah, be in touch by like late winter, early spring next year to learn more.
Fantastic, thanks. So I want to open it up for additional questions. Thank you for bearing with me through the technical glitch. I hope you'll check out the one website that I wanted to share with you was ecospark.ca's water quality dashboard. So take a moment for that, and we'll be sharing a feedback survey link. So just check your email and you can give us any info that you would recommend we share with others. We're always looking for new ideas. Really appreciate your time. And let me check the chat here, see if anybody has a question. Monica, if you see any come up, let me know.
Karen's son has a bit of a paragraph here. I can read it out loud. It says, we often talk about the benefits of trees because we like to put a positive spin on things. I think we also need to get better at understanding why people don't want trees and see if there are arguments we can make to directly address those concerns or their concerns. One that comes up a lot is they don't want to invest in tree maintenance, so it's too expensive or they don't know how to go about getting an arborist. And they're worried the tree is going to fall on their house or the roots will damage their pipes and foundation.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that thought. It's totally true. We have this conversation a lot in our community, and I think just even the mindset and how people talk about events, tree events, for example, can be very influential. So thinking about the loss that we have when our trees have to get carved into odd shapes to fit a power line through, but then also like the real concern that people have for their homes or their cars, and explaining what it is to be in a natural environment. My little one's home today with the sniffles. This is Morris. So some of the good resources out there, I think the city's done a lot to help people understand what it is to have trees and what that means in a practical sense in their environment. And then if other people have other resources to share to help further that conversation, that's really helpful as well. And again, it's always a trade-off. So if you can talk to people about the benefits of trees and help them understand that actually we are protecting our homes with trees, we are protecting our children and keeping the future bright, helping our entire city and property values with trees in our communities, and that's really helpful as well.
Yeah, Maureen is just adding to the conversation that there needs to be more education about trees and the conflicts that people have based on misunderstandings and development.
Absolutely, a lot of misinformation out there, and I think that's important. And when we can talk with youth about trees and more of the specifics, then the further along we can bring that home for families as well. And just taking pride, right? Like taking pride in the largest of a particular tree species. People have done that for a long time. And I found recently it's called the Nut Growers Association of Ontario, which I love. So instead of like, oh, all of these hazelnuts have fallen on my sidewalk and it's a problem to sweep up, people taking some ownership and some pride about what's actually a food source and how that can be part of our story as well. That's a really good step you can take. So we're at 1 o'clock. If there's one more question, we can take one more.
Well, there's a comment from Andrew saying it drives him nuts how people can pretty much plant anything they want on their property.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think really encouraging people to explore the beauty of our native trees as well is amazing. And you know, we rent, and I've been sort of slipping brochures into my landlord's mail to say like, oh, we can plant these and that. And we ended up putting in some service berries this year, which is sort of a large shrub, small tree. So I feel like I'm tree planting by taking those steps where we had permission, and that was great. So yeah, do what you can. Be proud of the trees that are surviving in this urban environment, and take great pleasure in that. And thank you for taking the time today to think about trees a little bit. I hope you'll go out because it's a beautiful day. Get started doing some iNaturalist observations. Again, you can email me at dana@ecospark.ca if you're interested in that tree survey or in the air quality monitoring brainstorming session. We're always looking for volunteers to help out with those. And thank you so much. Monica, thanks for hosting again. And if anybody